All right, well, welcome everybody to the MnSTAC, the June MnSTAC Forum. We have with us today Ryan Gustafson. He holds a bachelor's degree in urban forestry from the University of Wisconsin-Stevens Point, is a board certified master arborist. He's celebrating his 15th year at Davey Tree Expert Company, where he's held a variety of positions such as inventory arborist, plant healthcare technician, residential sales arborist, and is currently a project developer with the Davey Resource Group. Ryan is the current treasurer for the Minnesota Society of Arboriculture, as well as a tree fund liaison for the chapter. And Ryan is going to talk to us about how to get money for your urban forest, which I'm sure a lot of people are interested in. So Ryan, if you're ready, you want to share your screen?
All right, yeah. All right, and I'm gonna turn my camera off too, just so my facial expressions don't distract you too much. All right, yeah, thanks Eric for the introduction. Before I get started, Eric mentioned that I am the treasurer for the Minnesota Society of Arboriculture. My term is up at the end of this year, so we're looking for someone to run as treasurer and a few other positions. So if you're interested at all in volunteering with MSA, the treasurer position is kind of a good position to get your feet wet. It's not too demanding and there's staff to help you out. So if you're interested, reach out to me. Otherwise, I saw Cameron, the current president, he's online as well. So just my plug for MSA and getting involved. All right, on to the presentation. As Eric mentioned, I'm a project manager or project developer for the Davey Resource Group. And I work with a lot of different communities and their forestry departments throughout the state and surrounding states. And a lot of times I hear about, projects wanting to get done, but there's usually two hurdles. It's either having the budget to get a project done or just the time to get the project done as well. And so I thought putting together some resources of different grants that are available out there to Minnesota, as well as kind of nationally, and some other programs that aren't necessarily just grant funding, but just to help get other things done within your program. All right, so we're going to go over a few different kind of sources of funding. I broke them into more local and then moving up into the state level, and then some national and federal programs that are out there. And then some, again, I didn't put it on here, but some other resources that are out there that aren't necessarily just funding. And then some future funding sources to keep an eye on. We'll go over some of those things. So we'll start off with local funding sources. Watershed districts are a great resource and to get some projects done within your city and some of the harder areas of the city to grow trees. Watershed districts are really focused on water quality of the local watershed. And as a lot of us know, trees and stormwater and trees and water quality, go really well together. So that's a good way to increase your urban canopy, is getting some trees planted to help the watershed district with water quality issues. Not all watershed districts are created equal. There's some that cover a very large area, some that cover very small areas, some have a lot of funds available to do projects, some have hardly any funds and hardly any staff. So just getting to know your local watershed district and what their resources are and what they're capable of is a great place to start. And then if your watershed district, is kind of smaller, doesn't have a lot of staff or funds available, you can always check with the soil and water conservation districts in your area. They have grant funds as well to do some projects. A couple of projects that I've worked with or seen that have been done, the Mississippi Watershed Management Organization, with the partnership of the Minneapolis Parks and Rec Board, and I believe the downtown, I forget the name of it, the downtown district, downtown improvement district, that's the one. They did these sunken in tree planters on 8th Street, the stormwater planters. So the surrounding impervious surfaces are draining into these tree pits, and the water just soaks in there instead of running off into the storm sewer and running off into the local waterways. It helps to reduce that. And so it gives you a great place to plant a tree instead of just a small typical tree pit. Gives a lot better rooting space for the trees and native plants that are in there. And then another project is the Comfort Lake Watershed District. They did one project called the Greening Big Box and Streets. So this is an area within the Watershed District where there's a lot of big box stores, Targets, and those types of things that have parking lots, large impervious surface areas, and multi-lane streets. And so they built these stormwater retention areas and we're planting trees in there again to help take up that stormwater. And by building these, the typical, parking lot tree island, those are really compact and typically trees don't do well there. But with these engineered stormwater retention areas, it gives the trees a lot better chance to survive. So these are some ways to increase your urban canopy and plant some trees. Another local grant fund is the Hennepin County Healthy Tree Canopy Grants. This is a really great grant program. It is only available to organizations within Hennepin County, and they have 4 different kind of categories to apply, or that can apply to municipalities, schools, nonprofits, and affordable housing. And I'll go through detail in each one of those. But you can do a variety of different projects with these funds. You can do tree inventories, tree removal and replacement, and then educational programs or opportunities. The grant cycle is just up. They were due June 10th this year. So can't apply this year anymore, but start planning for next year. And talking with Jen Colgren, she had kind of mentioned a couple of things if you want to have a successful project or kind of stand out from the rest, to make sure that your project includes a lot of community involvement and engagement. And then also they have a priority tree planting areas within the county. On the map there, you can see the darker shaded areas are where they see a priority to plant trees, and then the lighter areas isn't as high of a priority for them. So the first category is for municipalities, and kind of a 2-step program for municipalities. First, starting off with, if you don't have a tree inventory, that's where they want you to start. And so you apply for that to get your tree inventory either completed or started altogether, and you can apply for a maximum of $5,000 for that. And then once your tree inventory is complete and you have a tree inspector or a certified arborist on staff or under contract, then you can apply for more funds to do different types of projects, like writing a management plan, doing tree removals or ash removals and tree plantings, building a gravel bed, and then doing ash treatments as well. And these projects can be up to $50,000 for those. And with all of these projects, you need to have 25% matching funds with those grants. The last year's grant cycle, a couple projects that were funded. The city of Champlin got $18,000 to establish a gravel bed and plant 30 trees in there and then treat a number of ash trees. The city of Orono got $5,000 to inventory trees within the street right-of-ways. And then Tonka Bay got $20,000 to remove some ash trees and then plant new diverse species of trees. The next category is nonprofits and schools. So that's K through 12 schools, public, private, charter schools, and then nonprofit organizations. And they can apply for tree planting, tree-related education, and then tree inventories and ash removals with those types of projects. And they can apply for up to $10,000 for their projects. And they need 25% matching just for ash removals, but the other projects don't need any matching funds. And a couple projects that were done this last grant cycle, Rockford High School got almost $10,000 to create an arboretum on the school property by planting 111 different trees and then relating some developing some tree-related education programs with that. Project Sweetie Pie, which is a nonprofit, got $10,000 to plant some fruit trees in some vacant lots in North Minneapolis. And then Faith United Methodist Church, they got funds to remove a couple ash trees and plant a bunch of new trees. And I believe I was going to change the email address on this slide, but I spelled Hennepin wrong. So just notice that I forgot to change that, and I think on this slide as well. And then the last category is affordable housing. And this is for multifamily or single family affordable housing projects. And for the funds, you can do ash removals and tree plantings and projects up to $20,000. And again, 25% matching funds for that. And a couple of projects that were done was Aon, which is a property management company. They got $20,000 to plant 169 trees at some apartments in Bloomington. And then Autumn Ridge Apartments planted some new trees in Brooklyn Park, and the city of Edina removed some ash trees and planted a bunch of new trees as well. So that is a lot, but that is the Hennepin County, their Healthy Tree Canopy Grant Program. So this program through the Tree Trust isn't necessarily direct funding to your urban forestry program, but if you have a lack of funds, they can help assist you in planting trees. It's the Green Futures program. So the applicant, the city that's applying for it, they need to have a public property area that can plant a minimum of 50 trees, and then you have to commit 3 years of maintenance for the newly planted trees. And then you have to show a need of assistance, why you need help with the planting project. And then with this, the Tree Trust, they'll solicit and manage the donations to help fund the cost of buying the trees and planting the trees and things like that. They'll help you develop a landscape plan with planting these trees, what types of trees and where they should go and things like that. And then again, they'll provide the trees, the mulch, and other planting materials and equipment for the planting. And then they'll make a day out of it, have it more of a volunteer event, get the community involved in planting the trees, but they'll have staff out there and prepare the planting sites and help with everything. So it's a great way to get some trees in the ground and help expand your urban forest canopy. And then next, the Tree Trust, they also do the community tree sales. And I know a lot of other communities do this on their own. Last year, they worked with Eden Prairie, Minneapolis, St. Louis Park, and just a great way to sell trees within your urban forest, get trees planted on private property. And it's kind of a unique way to have an impact on what types of trees get planted on private property within your community. Otherwise, you really don't have any say of what people are planting. So if you know you have a lot of maple trees and you want to diversify a little bit, you can not sell maple trees and get them to plant a little bit more variety and increase that diversity on private property. And these are only available, or the Tree Trust kind of works in the metro area. So if you're kind of outstate and outside of that reach, one thing to consider is talking with the local soil and water conservation district. I know they do a lot of tree sales in the springtime. Typically, they are selling smaller trees that are bundles, and like you have to buy a bundle of 25 trees, which isn't ideal if you're in a quarter-acre residential lot. You don't really have room to plant 25 trees. But maybe talking with them just to see if you can get some potted trees like the one here in the picture. If people just want to buy 1 or 2 trees, something like that, something to consider. And then another one I kind of threw in here last minute, so I don't have a whole lot of information. Again, this isn't direct funding to your community, but a way to potentially get some projects done with help of the Community Forestry Corps. You can have one of these representatives work in your community and having them focused on a certain project and work with them to get that project done. And with doing that, you're helping train the future workforce in our industry. And this program is run through AmeriCorps and kind of the Green Corps operations. And some of the project that they could work on are, developing tree planting events, volunteer tree planting events, having them build a gravel bed nursery and get that established for your community, write management plans, work on your tree inventories and things like that. All right, so those were the local region. Now we're moving on to more state fund or state funding sources, starting with the DNR. They've put out a couple different EAB type grants in the last few years, so I'll go over those. In 2019, they had two different EAB grants. One is preparing for EAB and the other was the planting grant. With the preparing for EAB, you could do tree inventories, management plans, and then ash removals and replacements. There were 13 grants that were awarded with that, with a maximum of $100,000. And then the tree planting grant, it was just strictly tree planting and the associated needs along with the tree planting. There were 12 grants that were awarded with a maximum of $30,000 for those programs. And then just a couple of the cities that were awarded funds and how much they were awarded. And then this year they had the Shade Tree Program bonding grant, which was strictly for tree removal and tree replacement. And then priority was given to applicants that had known EAB infestations, and then projects that benefited underdeserved populations and area of concerns. Again, this project was due, or the applications were due March 22nd, so we're kind of past that, and I haven't seen the results of who's won those grants yet. And then both of these grants were put on by the Urban and Community Forestry team in the DNR, which is Valerie McClanahan and Emma Schultz. And there isn't any dedicated EAB funding or grant funding with the Urban and Community Forestry team at this time. So just kind of grants that when they're always trying to apply for more funding to put out grants like this. So just kind of keep an eye out for future grant opportunities like this. And then also they're oftentimes applying for federal grants to do larger projects. And with those projects, they also partner up with communities to get their projects done. So you have a chance of working with them on some other projects. Another DNR grant is the CPL grants, the Conservation Partner Legacy Grant. These aren't necessarily directly urban forestry related. They're more restoration type projects that you can get funded. But most municipalities have parks that have natural areas, and a lot of times they're degraded. So they're still a part of the urban canopy. So you could do restoration work within your parklands. And a couple of projects that were done, the city of Burnsville, they did an Oak Savanna restoration projects in Terrace Oaks Park and got funding for a couple of years. In 2018, they got $110,000. And then in 2020, they got another $63,000 to continue that project. And then in 2020, Golden Valley, they got $50,000 to do a habitat restoration in Pennsylvania woods, which was mostly buckthorn removal and then kind of replanting some native species to keep that buckthorn at bay. So just another way to think about, just not straight urban forestry type tree planting or inventory type work, but grants to help fund other type projects as well. And there's a number of other state level grants that are out there. I'm not going to do a deep dive into all these, but there's LCCMR grants, but those are where the funds, the Urban and Community Forestry team gets their grants to help fund the EAB grants and stuff. And then there's the Outdoor Heritage Fund. That's where the CPL grants come from, but you can apply for bigger projects directly to the Outdoor Heritage Fund. The Clean Water Fund, I couldn't find any tree or forestry related projects, but as we mentioned before, their trees and stormwater are kind of a natural fit. So there's always that potential for tree planting type projects. And then in northern Minnesota, the Minnesota's Coastal Grant Program, which is focused around Lake Superior with habitat and water quality. There's been some tree planting, green infrastructure projects that have been done with that. And then the Minnesota Pollution Control Agency, they put out a number of different grants. Last year they had one about climate change resiliency, and you could potentially do a project with planting trees that are resilient to climate change and things like that. So you just kind of have to get creative depending on the project and find ways to get some funding on the local level. All right. So moving on to more of the federal level funding, there's a couple that I'll go through. The Great Lakes Restoration Initiative, GLRI, they have a forest restoration area of funding, and this is just directly related. The projects have to be directly in the Great Lakes watershed. And as you can see there on the map, in Minnesota, it's kind of starts south of Duluth and then goes out west and encompasses Hibbing. And then as you get farther north, kind of tucks in closer along Lake Superior. And the projects you can do is, mitigating forest insects, EAB. There's been a lot of projects with EAB and the ash stands up there. And then reducing runoff through green infrastructure. So again, tree planting, stormwater type things. And a couple of projects that were done in Minnesota is in 2016, the DNR planted 600 trees in 3 different communities along the North Shore. And then in 2017, they partnered with the city of Duluth and were able to plant 500 trees there again with the green infrastructure and reducing stormwater runoff. And then another one is with the EPA environmental justice grants. I didn't see a whole lot of urban forestry ones with this one quite yet, but I did come across one with the city of St. Louis, and the project was called the 24-to-1 Clean Air Project, where they did a canopy assessment of the St. Louis area and related it to the health benefits of trees and asthma rates in lower income areas where there isn't a whole lot of tree canopy cover, and use that data to kind of educate people in the area to plant more trees in the lower income areas to help with the health related benefits of trees. So pretty unique project. And so that kind of covers all of the grants that I've done. I know I probably didn't touch on all of them. If there's some out there that you're aware of, I'd love to know about them. I'm sure everyone else would. So if you want to put them in the chat, it'd be great to hear of other ones. Some tips for success when applying for grants. If it's a state grant, a lot of those, especially with the DNR, they follow the Minnesota Forestry Action Plan is the plan that they have in place to kind of guide them in their projects. And so if your project follows the action plan, it's going to help out the DNR and help out you have more success in getting funding. As I heard from Hennepin County, having community involvement as a part of your project, climate change, climate resiliency is kind of a big thing right now. And then, water quality is another big thing for Minnesota with all the lakes and rivers. And then environmental justice is a pretty hot topic lately. And so the more you can involve these types of things within your project is going to give you more success when applying and getting funding for these grants. All right, I'm going to move into some additional resources that are out there that aren't necessarily funding, but could help get you more funding through other resources. There's a website, the Vibrant Cities Lab, which has an urban forestry funding action guide, which has a lot of information in there that you could reach out to. And then the Minnesota Green Step Cities is a program to help your city become more resilient and things like that. And again, there's no funding associated with it, but it could help you apply for more funding in the future with that program. And then the Minnesota Society of Arboriculture, they have a few different funding opportunities. If your community doesn't have money to send you to educational events, they do have some conference scholarships to go to, like the short course, their fall conference. You can apply to get reimbursed for those. And then also we did a partnership with the DNR and did some ISA certified arborist scholarships where you get reimbursed for passing the exam and becoming a certified arborist. And that was for people of underserved populations in outstate Minnesota. We had 2 successful applicants that took and passed the exam. And I know we have a lot more funding, so we'll probably be putting that out again, hopefully in the near future again. So again, if you don't have the funding to get someone on staff certified, this is a way to help pay for that. And a couple of future funding sources that are kind of on the horizon. There's a movement, the Trees for Communities. It's a program they're trying to get funding through the large infrastructure package that's being kind of negotiated in DC right now. They're looking to get, I believe it's $4 billion over the next 5 years to do urban forestry type projects, tree plantings, things like that, but also create jobs with that, with training of up and coming green industry folks. And then the MRRI, I think I had enough R's in there, the Mississippi River Restoration and Resilience Initiative. There isn't a whole lot out there on the internet about this one yet, but I've seen a presentation, but they're trying to start a grant program similar to the GLRI grant, where they have dedicated funding to do restoration type projects and along the Mississippi corridor, just to help keep that water body healthy and things like that. All right. As I mentioned, I probably missed a grant program here or there. So if you know of any other ones, drop them in the chat. And with that, that's about all I have. So if there's any questions, be happy to answer them.
Excuse me. I had trouble finding my mic button. Thanks, Ryan. Nice presentation. That we've been posting, for those of you who didn't have access to your chat box as Ryan was presenting, we've been posting links throughout in the chat box. So you might want to take a look at that. You could copy those out to have access to. There was a question about whether or not Ryan would share the PowerPoint presentation. And Ryan, if you'd like to, you can certainly post that on the MnSTAC website. But otherwise, this entire presentation is being recorded and will be available on our YouTube channel, which I've posted a link to. But let me post that link again, just so it's right at the top of the feed. And there's a question that came in while I'm looking for that from Lauren. When does the Conservation Partners Legacy Grant Program typically release their grant for applications for the metro area? Do you know, Ryan?
I don't know off the top of my head. I'd have to look back at that. I know they typically do a couple different rounds of grants, but yeah, they have it broken up between the metro area and kind of outstate Minnesota. I'd have to look again. I don't remember when that is.
You gave some good resources for where people can get grants. Do you have suggestions for how to actually go about writing the grants, and like what types of things are important to include to make sure that your grant is is successful, if you've either reviewed grants or helped put them together, do you have some kind of tips or ideas for folks as to what to include and how to include it?
Yeah, I think, kind of showing the need for the grant, being very detailed in what you're going to do with the project, and some of those things depending on what grant you're applying for, but tying in the pieces of environmental justice or community involvement, and how it's kind of the bigger picture items as well. Those really help to make your project stand out.
Have you found that there are certain things people have included that are not helpful? I mean, so kind of the opposite question of, hey, don't maybe include these types of things. Make sure you're really just focusing on some other area.
I haven't. No, I guess I don't have any good examples of things not to include. I think the more detailed, the better is usually the way to go.
Okay, good. Once you get the grant, so let's say you're successful and you actually get the grant, do you have some project management experience that you can share with people on how to best utilize those funds to make sure that you're achieving the goals that you put out in the grant? Because sometimes you get the money and then all of a sudden you're not sure what to do with it or how to operationalize that. Can you share some of your experiences in that regard?
Yeah, I think, as you're applying for the grant, just kind of having a plan in place of, if you get it, how to implement that. If you have that capability in-house, doing it in-house, or bringing in a contractor to help kind of manage that project to make sure everything gets done. And then, recording and keeping track of your expenses and things like that, and just kind of keeping detail of everything that gets done.
So making sure to have very detailed records, and maybe setting up some of those partnerships beforehand as you're thinking about not just getting a quote for proposal, but actually figuring out how would we work together, say if they were going to work with an outside partner.
Yeah, exactly. I think having that all in place before you apply is probably the best way to go. So once you get the grants, you can hit the ground running and go for it and not have to figure it out afterwards.
And in terms of the funding amounts that people apply for, do you have some suggestions or recommendations? Do you apply for the maximum amount? Do you apply just for what you need? Do you see that there's some grants, hey, you can apply for, but they'll adjust it down, so you should always over apply for certain grants?
I would say kind of, developing that budget and sticking close to your budget. You might have a little bit over here and there. So maybe applying for a little bit over, but, I wouldn't just apply for the maximum amount every time. I think if you can really narrow down your budget and show these are the expenses that you're going to incur, and being detailed in that sense as well, will help you a better success of getting that grant.
Yeah. Yeah, Steve just had a comment here, and maybe a request if you've got some to share, but regarding writing a successful grant application, is it possible that you had some successful applications that you have access to, Ryan, that you might be willing to share, or I guess anyone on the call, if you have some? If you had those, we'd be happy to post them on the MnSTAC website, or a link to them, if that's something you had to share.
Yeah, I'm sure I could come up with some that I can send to you.
Okay, excellent. Yeah, I would agree with Steve. Sometimes it's nice to have a template. You just want to see, what does it look like? How does it actually read through, so that you can see what others have written and how they've written it in the style, and as to what has been successful.
Yeah. Yeah. And I saw a comment on there from Jennifer Teagarden about getting trees with the Soil and Water Conservation District. Again, those are all usually typical bare root, but it's something that you could use in your gravel bed. So if you have a gravel bed, so I think that's a great idea. Yeah,
excellent. And I think Jennifer also noted that the bulb and burlap trees are usually not approved for at least the DNR grants, because they're just a lot more expensive. And so your money doesn't stretch quite as far. So I think that's probably an important thing to consider when you're writing the grant, as to how you would use those funds. If they don't specifically say that, most, I think, places that are giving out grants want to see maximum output for the dollars that they're putting in. And so if there's some way to purchase something a little less expensive, like bare root versus balled and burlap, that might increase your chances of getting, if you can show that.
Yep, exactly. And I've heard as well with those, they also consider, with having community involvement and doing community tree planting events, most people can't manhandle a balled and burlap, 2-inch balled and burlap root ball. So getting kids and, families involved, having those containerized trees or bare root trees is a lot easier for them to get involved in planting those.
Yeah, that's good. Thinking about volunteers and how to incorporate those volunteers, I think, is probably important. Excuse me, have you seen or are you aware that just incorporating a volunteer group, like, I don't know, it could be church groups or it could be other, citizen groups that come in, is that helpful? Is that something that you've had experience with doing, or is it mostly working with businesses?
I haven't had any direct experience working with volunteer groups, but I think having those a part of, depending on the grant that you're applying for and the type of project you're doing, but where there's an opportunity to involve, church groups or Boy Scout groups or something like that, I think is always a good thing and kind of stands out for the project.
Yeah, I would say probably master gardener groups, master naturalist groups are all excellent things to include. We also have, and I'll post a link to it here, the Minnesota Tree Care Advocate Program. If you're unaware, there's a great group of trained volunteers specifically for trees and urban forestry. So I think that's also a group to look at, either getting involved with or reaching out and saying we have a volunteer opportunity for people to get engaged. Jennifer just posted another link in the chat that Emma presented on application strategies for grants, and that can be viewed. So another resource for people to look through in terms of how to maximize your ability to get funding to help with the projects in your urban forests. So that's great. Thanks for posting that, Jennifer. All right. If there's no other comments or suggestions or things people would like to share, I'd like to thank everybody for joining in.